Hello, welcome to another episode of the Wildly Strong podcast. And today we're going to talk about food noise and how it's not your fault that you can't stop eating, and kind of look into the deeper, darker side of food noise. So being a coach in this space with food and training and, body image, weight loss, all these things, and just by being a human being myself, a very flawed human being, especially in the beginning days, I think it's really important to understand how food impacts your mind, how food is created, and to really uncouple the responsibility that you think you have, or the ways in which you are failing when it comes to food, and uncouple that from the food itself. Because a lot of the time, and I talk about this a lot, like throughout the podcast and with clients all the time, usually when we can't control something, or we can't achieve a goal, or we can't change in the way that we aspire to change, it almost always comes down to the whole notion that it is not your fault, you are not failing, like something's always going on behind the scenes. So there's going to be a lot of podcast episodes along this kind of line of thinking, or this train of thought, because one of the key aspects of change is freeing yourself from the moral judgment or the belief that you're a failure as a person because you can't overcome something. So this particular episode, we're focusing on food noise and the engineering of food and how that is impacting you. So in my 20s, I was like a massive fitness buff, but I had a massive binge eating problem, and I could trace that all the way back to when I was younger, like sneaking around the house, trying to get chocolate out of the fridge without anyone noticing, getting a box of chocolate on Christmas and eating the entire box within half an hour, 12 Easter eggs in one sitting and feeling disgusting. Or, when you have treats in the cupboard or the fridge and you think, yeah, I'll just have a little bit a day, but you just, you can't move on with your day until you've eaten it all, because it just plagues your mind. And there's also, it's really common, that someone might go to work or, even be out, like go on a road trip, and the only thing that you can actually think about is food. And that obsessive compulsive association with food, the relationship you have with constant thoughts around food, is completely engineered. So there's many elements that come into play. We're only going to focus on the food side of it, but just know that there's also things like under-eating protein, not knowing how to deal with your emotions, being overwhelmed, being too busy, not sleeping, so there's a lot of other factors that play into it. But this episode, we're going to be focusing on the food side. So back around 10 years ago, I read a book called Salt, Sugar, Fat by Michael Moss. And it completely changed the way that I looked at food. Like I even recall how liberating it was for me at the time when I read it. I mean, food technology has only gotten better since then, but essentially what this book did was show how food companies deliberately engineer products around specific combinations of ingredients like salt, sugar, and fat, as the title suggests, to keep you consuming the food. And he speaks about how highly refined and how much money goes into each individual creation. So if you just think about something like Pepsi Max or Solo, or like a Cadbury block of chocolate or a Hershey's bar, anything like that. So any product that comes in a packet that you have trouble regulating your consumption of once you start, and everyone's got their vice, like their favorite thing that they can't stop eating or can't stop buying. Every single one of those products has cost millions of dollars in resources to put together. And this comes down to not just the food, but it's like how it feels in your mouth, the actual flavor of the food, the color of the packaging, your perception of the food through advertising, the placement of the food on the shelf. There's a lot of different layers to what makes these foods addictive. So food scientists in these companies, they calculate the Bliss Point, what they call the perfect amount of sugar that triggers the reward center in the brain. It's called the Bliss Point. The mouthfeel of fat, so how a fatty acid kind of feels on your on your tongue, or the texture of it in your mouth, and the exact level of salt that makes food pop. And when they get these things right, like all of these things right together, that is what they generally call the bliss point. So it's basically the perfect combination of ingredients and sensation of a food that makes your reward center light up. And to highlight how extreme this reward center, activation is, he has a quote in the book which says, "If sugar is the methamphetamine of processed food ingredients, then fat is the opiate." And I don't think I need to go into detail about what methamphetamine or opiates do to people's brains. The main goal of the food companies is to maximize consumption, so not satisfaction. So it's not about you getting your nutritional needs met. It's not about making you happy on a Sunday afternoon. It's about increasing your consumption. So they're specifically engineered so that it's really hard for you to stop eating them. So when you find yourself deep in a box of Rose's chocolates or onto your second block of Cadbury chocolate, keep in mind that the food was designed to activate your reward pathway and very quickly, to delay fullness. So this food contains no protein and no fiber, because protein and fiber will all slow down digestion, and protein is an essential nutrient, so it will trigger your brain to think, oh, I'm getting the nutrients that I need. So these things are specifically left out of this food. And they're also designed to bypass your hormones so that you don't actually know when you've had enough. So in your brain and digestive system, you have leptin, which tells you when you've eaten enough. And then you have ghrelin, which tells you when your stomach is empty. So when you feel hunger pains, that's ghrelin. It's basically talking to your brain and it's turning on the food-seeking behavior. And then when you're full, it just means that leptin has sensed that your stomach is full and you've had plenty of whatever the meal was. If you think about something like a huge casserole or a huge steak or, a gigantic salad or something like that, then you know that you reach that fullness state without binging. But if you think of the equivalent of like a pack of chips or a box of shapes or Oreo cookies or something like that, you don't get the same sensation. Like most people will feel sick before they feel full. And that's because they've way superseded the body's need and ability to break that stuff down because they haven't had the leptin signal that they've had enough. So that is by design. They made the foods that way on purpose. So the amount of money that these companies put into understanding your behavior, your neurocircuitry, your reward systems is astronomical. It's astronomical. And when it comes to, I think they use, I can't remember if it was Dr. Pepper or it was a drink like that, like something that's not big in Australia, but is huge in America. And he explained how, and I'm paraphrasing, so I'm just going off memory, so the actual very finer details of this are going to be off. Like, let's just say you had 100 samples of Dr. Pepper. I think it might have been Dr. Pepper Cherry, something like that. Let's just say you had 100 samples. They'll work out which of those, like let's just say they want to work out which 5 were the tastiest. So they've already formulated the product, and then now they put it into action. Then you have those 5. And then if you expand those 5 recipes, add nuance to all the recipes, now you go back to 100. And then which ones of those are the most popular, and they repeat this process until they have one that is unanimously the favorite flavor. And what that means is that is the one that's going to fly off the shelf, that's going to override your signals, that's going to hook the most amount of consumers, and in turn make the most profit for the company. So it's a lot like split test advertising, like when they want to advertise anything, like they put 10 ads out, they work out which one gets the highest return. They then split that into 5. They put those 5 ads out. They then work out again which one gets the best return, and they keep doing that until they have one highly successful ad. And most of the time they don't know what it is that made it so successful, right? Like was it the red font? Was it the cursive writing? Was it the image? Was it the font? Like, they don't really know. It's just a process of elimination. And because they have such a huge amount of money to push into it, then they can keep they can keep refining. Like, we couldn't do this as just like a solo business, but you can absolutely do that when you have billions of dollars at your disposal. So yeah, after I read this book, I went to the supermarket and I wanted to see for myself, because there's a specific ratio in different foods. Like in savory snacks, there's a ratio of fat to salt. And then in sweet snacks, there's a ratio of sugar and fat. And then in breakfast foods, there's a ratio of sugar and salt. When I looked at like the biscuits and the ice cream and the like chocolate blocks, I kid you not, the exact ratio was present in every packet. And it was something like, if there's 20 grams of carbs, it was 9 grams of fat. It was something like that. If it was 10 grams of carbs, it was 4 or 5 grams of fat. Like it was a specific ratio. And it was present in every single packet food. So then I was like, holy crap, the book is accurate. If I want to stop binge eating, I need to eliminate these foods because I don't have the power over it, and you would probably know a couple of people that have no real resonance with these kinds of foods. They don't get sucked in, they don't get overwhelmed by it. They can have a bit of cake and put it down. But just know that these are kind of genetic anomalies. It's like if you get 10 people to smoke a cigarette, not everyone's going to become a smoker. But if you get 10 people to eat a pack of Tim Tams, maybe, these are not exact numbers, but let's just say 2 of them go, it's all right, and then move on. If you're one of those people who can't move on, then you're the kind of person whose nervous system is susceptible to these foods. So you're basically their perfect, ideal, targeted consumer, and everything they're designing is to get you more hooked. So sometimes when you just make these kind of associations, you're like, oh, I see, that's why, that's why I can't stop. That's why I can't stop. It's like if someone was an alcoholic and they overcome it and they'll say, I'll never touch a drink again. Because when they have a drink, something comes, something washes over them, they can't stop. So if you're someone that has a little cherry ripe and then suddenly you're eating a Mars bar and then now you're downing a pack of chips and now you're getting a caramel latte, then understanding that your reward circuitry is at fault, not you as a person. It's not a moral failing. It's not a mistake in your design. You just happen to have a nervous system that's primed to respond well to these foods. And, furthermore on that note, there's a lot of kind of different factors which might, I guess, play into whether or not you're one of those people. And I think on one side it can be genetic. Like when they study obesity, there are like the people that have a propensity to become morbidly obese absolutely have more sensitive reward pathways in the brain for food. So the actual obesity itself is not genetic, but the way that their mind responds to food and their reward pathways respond to food is more sensitive. And this is why those GLP-1 drugs have become so popular, because they say that they dull down the food noise, but they're actually dampening the reward center, which responds to the food. And now I'm not endorsing those or not endorsing those. I think that's 100% a personal decision you have to make with a doctor if you want to go down that kind of pathway. But anything that is priming or targeting your reward center, you want to be, I guess, very mindful of. So it's not that you need a drug to stop you. You need to work out, how do I stop seeing these foods are important, and then why am I relying on the foods? Because what you might find is underneath that is, say, a lack of emotional regulation, for example. Like maybe you don't know how to regulate your emotions. Like I just recently spoke with a client who said, every time she was upset as a baby or as a young child, her mother would just give her sugar. So if you think then, now as a grown-up, absolutely no fault of her own, but she was never comforted or supported through her distress in order to build capacity to be with her distress. She was given a treat which lit up her reward center. So every time she's distressed, she gets a quick reward. So then now as a grown-up, any sense of distress, and she doesn't even sense the distress half the time because it's so automatic and ingrained, she reaches for chocolate. So, and this is very common. This is a pattern I see with a lot of my clients. It's often very hard to trace it all the way back. But when you're young, you kind of learn how to emotionally regulate yourself with the support of your parents. Like if you're having a huge tantrum, say you're just throwing stuff around the room, if you have a parent who can be there with you and allow you to move through your emotions and then give you comfort and then give you support, this actually teaches you to be with those kinds of feelings in a safe way, because you're never going to be able to hurt yourself because your parent is right there. They're going to stop you from doing that. But you're able to express your emotion to the full extent and discharge all of that energy. Whereas if you were never allowed that, or, you might have even self-medicated, like it might not have even been your parents, but say you were really distressed in your teen years and you worked out that, when you have a pack of Doritos, I'll use those because they were my favorite. I'd get a pack of Doritos from the canteen every day. And, I immediately felt calm when I ate them. Start making these associations with foods and the emotional sensation or the calming and all of that. But then the foods themselves end up generating this food noise, which is then very hard to get rid of. So after I went to the supermarket and I established this, I was like, that's it. Who owns these companies? What other companies do they own? And I just boycotted all of them. So I was like, if it comes from Cadbury, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, Hershey's, Lindt, any of those companies, I just cut them all out, because I was like, I don't want to be a victim and on this roller coaster of absolutely no self-control because they want my money, because I know what the cost of that is, right? It's overeating, it's emotional eating. What we call emotional eating is often just food addiction and an inability to be with our emotions. It increases your food noise, way more weight gain, because you eat way more than what you're actually burning. You eat way more than you can digest and way more than you need. And then over time, because you have this food addiction, you actually lose all capacity to be with the sensations in your body that are driving appetite. So if you ate a purely whole food diet, it would be really hard to become overweight, and it would be really hard to get food noise. The food noise would set in when you're running short on food, if you don't have enough food. That's pretty much the same thing. If your body weight was running low, if you were losing weight and you were getting close to a leaner body composition that your body deems to be unsafe, then the food noise is going to kick in, because it's going to want to get you hunting, it's going to want to get you foraging, harvesting, all that kind of thing. So it's all there for a reason. But these food companies, they have way more advanced knowledge than you will ever have on your own body and your own system and your own nervous system. And they will use it against you, and this isn't just for food. This literally goes for everything. But in food, it's massive. So it's great to know, right? Like, you probably don't have an emotional eating problem. You probably don't have a natural food noise. You're probably undernourished because you're getting way too many calories from junk foods and nowhere near enough substantial food. So your body's not broken, it's just being completely overridden. And then once it's overridden, if you continue to eat these things, it's getting rewired, and your body is actually adapting in relationship with the amount of this food that you're consuming. So it will continue to change. Like, all you're thinking about is food. Your body is like, how do I get more of this food? And on top of that, you have things like candida, which is a bacterial overgrowth that blows up when you eat too many carbs or too much sugar. And just that in itself can talk to your nervous system and ask you to eat more sugar. It's a bit of a maze, but just know that it starts with the food. It's deliberate. And by cutting it out, you're actually freeing yourself of this huge, demon that is the junk food industry. And there's a quote in the book, and another good thing to know, like, food is created, not because we have a food shortage. Like, we don't sell Tim Tams because we have a food shortage. We have food abundance. Like, everybody, I don't know what the percentages are anymore, but it's over 50% of the West is overfed and undernourished. So overweight and still nutritionally deficient because of the amount of junk food that we're eating. So we're gaining heaps of fat, and we're getting all of this hormonal imbalance and internal digestive stress and we're getting our nervous systems and our reward pathways completely reprogrammed, but we're not actually getting the nutrients that we need in order to survive, which is healthy fats, omega-3, and protein, because we cannot make proteins in the body. Those are probably the most important ones. And then fiber to feed your gut bacteria. Outside of that, it's all really optional and dependent on how much activity you do. But there's a quote in the book which says, "Thou shalt not result in any loss of profit." So remember, when you consume something, if you've got a company that wants to make profit, so we'll say Coca-Cola, they want to make profit. So what are they going to do? They're going to make sure that you consume as much of their food as possible. So then what are they going to do? They're going to cut their expenses as much as possible, which includes lowering the quality of the ingredients as much as possible. And they're going to invest as much money as possible to extract the most amount of money from each product. So why would you make $10 billion a year from Diet Coke if you could make $80 billion a year just by changing a few key ingredients? And then with all that profit, they, divvy up all the excess, all the dividends, and then they send it off to the people that fund the company. So your food addiction is just really keeping billionaires very rich. And unless there's major reform, they're not going to change because they're not incentivized to change, because their incentive as a corporation is to increase profit year upon year. We all know what's going on with Coles and Woolworths supermarkets. I think Coles just said they made $1.2 billion profit this year. So I can guarantee you next year, they're sitting around their boardroom right now working out, how do we make 1.5? How do we make 2 billion? Because the bigger profit, the more the shareholders walk away with. So the only real way to get your power back is to try and not eat those foods. And a whole food diet is absolutely your best bet. And you'll find that there are some kind of foods that don't have the same kind of hold over you. And for everybody, it's a different food. Like I used to have a client that was obsessed with Smarties. She had to eat Smarties every single day. Whereas I would definitely say that I could totally leave Smarties, but if I started on, say, peanut M&Ms, I might not be able to stop. Or the crunchy M&Ms, because the texture kind of thing. We've all got our individual vices. So if you've got something that you can't stop eating, then it's really up to you to kind of, eradicate that food. And if you can't eradicate the food, then you want to address why you're so addicted to it. What does that food give you? And we talked about that in one of the, I think it was the 5th podcast episode, which about forming and breaking habits. How does the habit serve you? So it's all by design. It's engineered. You're the product. If something's really cheap, if it's easily accessible, you're the product. You're what they're extracting from. And just know that your reward pathways, if they are hijacked, if you're nibbling on sugar and hyper-palatable things all day, you're constantly hijacking your reward pathway, which is the same thing as if you're scrolling and, interacting on social media or using nicotine or heaps of coffees a day. The more you kind of stroke that reward center, then the more your motivation will collapse. So a lot of the time, collapsed motivation is just an overstimulated reward pathway, because the reward pathway exists to motivate you towards achieving great things. So if you're constantly feeding it, then, you lose the motivation to be able to hold a sustained thought or a sustained goal. Yeah, and if we keep using the food every time that we feel a bit stressed, in the sense of emotional eating, or if we're eating it for comfort, then we're not learning the self-regulation skills to meet those needs in a sustainable way, like reaching out for help or lowering your load, making significant changes in your life which will actually lower your stress. So the solution is to disengage as best as you can. Don't blame yourself. You should look into it more if you find that really interesting. So that's all for this week. I'm a day late, but here nonetheless. And any questions, leave them in the comments. Leave in the comments, and any ideas for topics, let me know. And if not, I will see you next week.